Now, last week we finished up, hopefully, with Cain and Abel. I hope that we have finished that particular study. The first man to kill a man in the Bible was Cain. He killed his brother. Do you know the first man the Bible calls a murderer? Let me ask you this. Do you know the first, and I can't say man, because that's going to give it away if I say that, because you're going to think it wasn't a man. Who was the first murderer in the Bible? Judas. Nope. Not the first one. Judas comes in the New Testament. First because the meanest one, because he killed Jesus, the Son of God, first in that sense. First murderer. Satan. The book of John called Satan the first murderer. Isn't that remarkable? I think it's in chapter 8. It's in chapter 8 or chapter 6 of the book of John. It's rather interesting where that is. Well, who on earth did he kill? If he's a murderer, who did he kill? He killed Cain and Abel. No, he didn't kill Cain and Abel. He killed who? He killed Adam and Eve. You just said that to trick me, Jackie. I'm telling you. And I bought right into it. That payback. So he killed Cain and he killed.
Well, they're setting them up for it anyway.
That's right. All right, let's get to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a really interesting chapter because it is the first of the begats chapter. If I say begats chapter, you know what I'm talking about? You know, we think of the begat chapter being Matthew chapter 1. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs, or begat his 12 sons, and all the rest. He begat Judah, and so we read that. You may have heard the story. If your memory may not be long enough to remember. That's the reason I enjoy teaching older people, because I can tell a joke over and over, and it's almost fresh and brand new. But an old country boy up in Alabama was reading Matthew chapter 1, and he read all the way through there. Abraham forgot Isaac, and Isaac forgot Jacob, and Jacob forgot Judah. And he went all the way through there, struggling with every name to the end of it. He got through those 17 verses. He said, now, I don't know why that's in the Bible. I believe as the Lord is trying to tell us we're also forgetful. And so, it's not he forgot Isaac, he begat Isaac. But you've got a begattal listing over here in chapter 5. Verse 1, this is the book of the genealogy of Adam in the day that God created man. So here it is. Here is the family tree of Adam. Now, you begin looking at it, and we've talked about some of this. Verse 2, he created them male and female, and blessed and called them, the New King James says called them mankind. The Old King James says he called them Adam, because they were mankind. And so Adam's name was what he was. He was called Adam because that's the Hebrew word for man, and so that was his given name. It's what God called him, man. And but since Eve was also a human by that mankind, she also was called Adam, and that's why if you read chapter 5 and verse 2, the interesting thing is that in verse 4. He had sons and daughters. I am glad that is found here in this text. He had sons and daughters. If I say the name Josephus, does that ring a bell? Does that ring a bell if I say Josephus? Who is Josephus? What nationality? Jewish? Christian or non-Christian? Non-Christian. When did he live? He lived simultaneously with Paul and with John and some of the others. I mean, he was a first century Jewish historian. Now, in that book Josephus, he writes all the way through. He starts at Genesis and goes through all of the Bible. That part of Josephus is called Antiquities, and in a footnote he talks about the fact, and he gives the number of sons and daughters that Adam and Eve had. And this is an approximate number, and it's not preacher's count, but it's like 37 sons and 38 daughters or something like that. Now, how'd you like to feed that household? I mean, how'd you like to cook? How'd you like to? But see, that may not be reality. We did the math last week talking about how long a woman is fertile. How long was Eve fertile? Well, long enough to have 200 or 300 children. And you can go with that wherever you want to go. Just turn your imagination loose. And because the Bible doesn't say, the Bible just say they had sons and daughters. Now then, in the genealogy of Adam in chapter 5, the genealogy in chapter 5 begins with who? Begins with Adam. The last verse tells us who it ends with. That's Noah. And so we're talking about from Adam to Noah. Now then, look when you get to chapter 6. Chapter 6, we've got Noah. And so we have a gap here of, from the time that Noah is really introduced to us, of over 1,500 years, a gap here of that period of time, maybe almost 1,600 years. The flood, by the way, you can show this, came 1,656 years after Adam was created. That's a rather important number. You don't have to remember the exact details, but there's a long gap here, and most of that gap is found in Genesis chapter 5. Because we've got Adam, it's rather ironic. How many days of the life of Adam do we know? Is it less than a year? Yeah. Is it more like a week? Yeah. I mean, we know about him being in the garden, the confrontation with God, and that's about all we know about Adam. Now, Deuteronomy 29:29 says what? Ought to be your favorite verse in the Bible sometimes. What's it say? Secret things belong to God. Things that are revealed belong to us. Secret things belong to God. And Brother Camp used to say, if God didn't choose fit to tell you that, why you were trying to figure it out? And we need to stop, not only speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where the Bible is silent, just stop where the Bible stops. And just, it's all right to say, I don't know. That's a good answer to a lot of questions people will ask you. Now, that doesn't mean we ought to try not to study the Bible, but we ought to be content not to know any more than what God tells us in this. If you'll look down through this genealogy, wonder if there are any names that you will recognize. Look in verse 4. There is Seth, and then in verse 9 there's Enosh. And then in verse 10, verse 9 has Canaan. You've got Canaan, and he gives in verse 12, he begets Mahalalel. Let's see, after Mahalalel, you've got verse 13, Jared. After Jared, you've got Enoch. That's in verse 19. After Enoch, you've got Methuselah. After Methuselah, you've got Lamech. And after Lamech, you've got Noah. 10 generations from Adam until Noah. There are some individuals who try to stretch out the Bible to accommodate some of the time frame of the matter of evolution, but you really cannot, it's impossible to stretch it out because of and the reason is because you've got specific number of years. Now, did you recognize any names there? Are there any names in this 10 generation other than Adam and Noah that you recognize? Enoch? You recognize any other name? Who? Methuselah. Now, if you're dyslexic, you are in luck. How long did Methuselah live? 1,000 years. No, close to it. How long did Methuselah live? Be dyslexic, read it frontwards or backwards, you'll get the same thing. 969. You want to read it backwards? Or if you're dyslexic, you want to read it forward? 969, depending on how you look at it. Anyway, those two names we recognize. Now, what do we know about Enoch? Well, let's see. Look at verse 5. Adam died. Verse 8, Seth died. Verse 11, Enos died. Verse 14, Cain died. Verse 17, Mahalalel died. Verse, let's see, who am I leaving someone? No. Verse 20, Jared died. Well, everybody's dying. And then all of a sudden, after he begat, verse 22, after he begat Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He didn't die. 365 years, and God took him. The New Testament word in Hebrews 11 is a word. It doesn't say he did not die. It said what? He was translated. He was translated. Now, when you translate something, you take it from one language and take it to another language. And evidently, when you translate a person, you take that person from one place to another place. That's rather interesting, I think, to think about it. I'm not sure why this happened. But if you'll stop and think about it for just a moment, if you read Genesis chapter 5 and you're there and you're Methuselah or you're Noah or something like that, if you're still alive, I guess. But if you were there, heaven is spoken of in this place. God took him. He did not die. Life after death. And what happens after you die, it says death is not the end. He died. But here's a man, did not say he died. It said God took him. And that's different from, sometimes we use that expression whenever we talk about our loved ones. God took our loved ones. And I'm not opposed to saying that, but that's not what's talking about Enoch. He was translated that he should not see death. He did not see death. And right here is evidence that there's something on the other side that's over there. Now, Methuselah, 969 years. Wonder how many generations Adam knew. Did Adam know his sons? Let's see. Let's go back. Let's add this up, okay? Adam was 130 years when he begat Seth. Well, first of all, we need to point out they did live nearly 1,000 years. Everybody in this list lived nearly 1,000 years. And you would too if you had a perfect body and lived in a world that did not have all the disease and all the bad stuff in it that our world has. God made a perfect man, and so a perfect man doesn't have a bad heart. He has a good heart. He doesn't have cancer. You understand what I'm saying? So genetically, there may be this explanation of it. But anyway, Adam was 130 years old when he gave birth to Seth. And, how long did Adam live altogether? Look at that in verse 5. How old was Adam when he died? 930 years when he died. Well, let's see. How old were you when you had your grandchild? Let's see how old Adam was when he had his first grandchild, Enosh. Let's see. Seth lived, verse 6, 105 years and begat Enosh. How old does that make Adam? He's what's that first number? 130 plus 105. How old is he when he becomes a grandfather? 235. Hey, is it possible he knew Noah? Wait a minute. When he became a great grandfather, verse 9, Enosh lived 90 years and begat Adam's great-grandson. Now, how old is Adam when he has a great-grandson? How much? 325? Is that right? 325 when he has his great-grandson. What about his great-great-grandson? Cain, verse 12, lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. His great-great-grandson now, how old is Noah? 395 when the great-grandson is born. You think he knew Noah? Well, let's see. Now we got to get three greats this time. His great-great-great-grandson. Let's see, that'll be up here in verse 15. Mahalalel lived 65 years. How old's Noah? How much? 460. Somebody gets proud because they're 5 generations. I believe Adam's going to, I say Noah a minute ago. I believe Adam is going to beat that by a long way. So he's 460, and he's got a great-great-great-grandson. Wait a minute. Verse 18, Jared waits a while. He's 162 before he has before he begets. How old's Noah when his great-great-great-great-grandson is born? How many? 622? 622. Okay, wait a minute. Let's go to the next one. Enoch, let's see. Oh, by the way, and who was that great-great-great-great-grandson? What's his name? Enoch. Wonder where Enoch learned about his God. Isn't that amazing? So we don't think this. We really don't think about Adam having been in the Garden of Eden, and now we're to the great-great-great-great-grandson, and that's Enoch. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Adam knew Enoch. Enoch knew Adam. Wait a minute. Who's that next one? Oh, that's Methuselah. Enoch lived 65 and begat Methuselah. That's verse 21. How old is Adam when Methuselah is born? You doing the numbers, not me. Is that 687? Did I do that in my head right? 687? He's not quite. He's still got another 300 years almost to live. It's old. You're right. You're right, Les. Okay, you're right. And what's that number? 687. And he knows Methuselah. Are we going to make it to Noah? Let's see. Methuselah lived 187 years. Now, you guys who've got the sharp pencil are going to have to add that other number to 187. How old is how many? 874. And he knows Lamech. And I've lost my greats. I think it's supposed to be 6 greats right now. I was keeping it on my fingers, all right? And he's how old? How old's Noah? How old is Adam? 874. I guess you're going to die in the next one, you reckon? Lamech lived 182 years. Now, if Adam had lived that 182 years, how old would Adam have been? So about 25, 26 years, lived 930, so about 50 years before Lamech, Adam dies. By the way, who's Lamech's son? Verse 29. Noah. Noah's grandfather knew Adam. I'm not sure why God puts these numbers in here. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? No, there's no absolute well, obviously Seth is not the firstborn. And so it may be, you would assume in view of the importance of the firstborn, they would be firstborn, but, there's no absolute proof of that. Gary had a comment.
Maybe he put it in there because Noah was the only one who was be saved with his family, and everybody else passed on. So we don't know how godly any of these people were.
That's right. I mean, honestly, I'm not always sure why he puts things in the Bible. But it's interesting. Isn't it fascinating? Yes, Fran.
I have a question. If you go back to when Adam lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image.
Yes.
What happened? Did he have otherwise? You wonder what they.
Nope. It's after his kind. My guess is it's after his kind of Genesis chapter 1. And so when this son is born, he was, yeah, well, obviously not identical, but after his likeness. And so he was a man, he was an Adam just like Adam was an Adam. He was a mankind just like Adam was a mankind. I'm guessing that's the implication of it. Maybe more than that, but, it's at least that much. There was a hand here, yes.
Yeah, you probably put the years because evolutionists were going to come along.
Well, and
figure
yeah, and Joyce says, you may have put it here, so we'd be able to have some affirmation about our own faith in the age of mankind. I mean, you've got to understand that the evolution was not that popular until about 200 years ago. Wasn't there? Why? Everybody was subject to God. Everybody in Europe and everybody in the Americas believed in God, and everybody, that's put that in quotation marks, everybody's trying to live by what God said. But the minute you acknowledge there's a God, the consequences of that is I've got to obey Him. If He's greater than me, if there is that highest power, then I owe something to Him. I've got to obey Him. And I believe one of the reasons, of the popularity of this matter of evolution is because I'm not accountable to anybody. If I'm just an animal, then I can live like an animal. There's no morality for animals, and so you have to deal with that. And I know that you've got to deal also with the fossils. You got to deal with all of the carbon dating. You've got to deal with all of that, and that's not our purpose in this class. But if you'll go to apologeticspress.com on the internet, there's a world of information that's there. And I say Apologetics Press because of our close association with those men. And we often have those individuals to come down here and speak because they're scholars in relationship to that. And just so you'll be aware of it, we try at least once every 3 or 4 years to have one of the creationists from there to come here for our teens. That's one of the reasons we have them here is because in that classroom right down the hallway, where the teens are, they need to hear the evidence. They need to understand that all that they're hearing in school, there's another side to it. If Adam and Eve had an ape-like mama and daddy, where does Adam's soul come from? You've got to understand that. And that in and of itself is if Adam and Eve's mama and daddy were purely animalistic, then how on earth does Adam have a soul? I know the answer to that from the Bible, but evolution, cannot do. And evolutionists don't have any idea about what happens when you die. If you're that's a matter of reincarnation and things of that nature. You got every bit of that. We're getting off track. Yes, Joey. Right. Yeah, and where do humans come from? They come from Adam giving Seth after his likeness, who gave birth after his likeness. Now then, Adam did not know Noah. Adam's grandfather did. Did your grandfather ever tell you any stories? Yeah. I've talked about my grandfather a lot. My grandfather used to say, and in one of these puzzles he'd give me, Dan, is this true or false? The oldest man that ever lived died before his father did. Is it true or false? The oldest man that ever lived died before his father did. Go figure that out, Dan. And, well, who's the oldest man that ever lived? Who was his father? Enoch. What happened to Enoch? He did not die. I love that special relationship I had with my grandfather. And it's obvious I talk about him a lot and everything, but that'll make you get down there and really study the Bible. Dan, here's truth. Go find this in the Bible. The oldest man that ever lived died before his father did. You know, it's like the oldest people in America live in Tampa. Are you aware of that? And their parents live in St. Petersburg. So you've got that same kind of dilemma here. Wait a minute. Noah. Well, let's start again with Methuselah. Methuselah lives how long? 969 years. This guy over here, babe in Christ, is not dyslexic. You got it, right? 969. Did Methuselah know Noah? Well, let's back up. Let's start with Methuselah, all right? Let's see. Methuselah lived 187, a new list of numbers now, those who are keeping numbers. He lived 187 years, and he had a son. So he's 187 when Lamech is born. How old was Methuselah when his grandson was born? Let's see, 186. Lamech lived 182. 186 and 182, is that 368? Is that about right? 369. 369. So whenever Noah is born, Methuselah's 369 years old. How old was Noah when the flood came? Look in chapter 7, verse 6. You want to add those two numbers together? He was 369 years old when Noah was born, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. How old was Methuselah when the flood came? Now, before you jump too far into conclusions, it's probably safer to say Methuselah died the year of the flood. The year of the flood. But when God looked down on this earth, how righteous was Methuselah? When God looked down on this earth, when he was going to send the flood, how righteous was Noah's father, Lamech? Isn't that amazing? I mean, we think genealogy, well, it's all the good guys. It's not all the good guys in the genealogy, just like there are not a lot of good guys in your family tree, which we'll not ask you to discuss openly unless you just choose to volunteer that. Little boy asked his grandfather, said, "Grandpa, were you alive when the flood came?" And his grandfather said, "No." The little boy said, "Why didn't you die?" I love that concept, you know. I thought everybody outside the ark died anyway. All right, now let's get to the flood. Is that interesting? Aren't those numbers interesting? I find it really interesting. Maybe more to that, but that's how, by the way, you add all of these up, the 969 the Noah being 600 years, and you add all those up, and it's 1,656 years from the birth of Adam until the coming of the flood. And in that you've got tons of stuff, and you've got it all in one chapter. And it's amazing how little you know. Amazing how to live. Now then, we need, just by the way, to go back and point out one other thing, and that is Noah had a perfect heart, but had a perfect mind too. Back up. Adam had a perfect heart, and Adam had a perfect mind. I'll get those two guys straightened out one of these times. He had a perfect brain too. No Alzheimer. Is that amazing? And so Adam was not some caveman running around grunting. Think about the things that mankind has placed on this earth, like the pyramids. Think about all the colossal buildings and structures there were in ancient times that we'd have trouble duplicating in our own day. We equate intelligence with education. And we are as wrong as we can be in doing that. Adam named all of the animals. That's not, he grunted and gave a different grunt for their names. It's remarkable. All right, let's get to the flood. We got to make some headway.
Is that the reason they had the flood, to get rid of all these old-timers?
To get rid of, Les wants to know why they have the flood, get rid of all the old-timers. Well, the old-timers that were bad, okay, that's why we have the flood. Chapter 6. Chapter 6, it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born to them. Look at those first 5 words in verse 1. Somebody says, that's the most comforting phrase in all the Bible. It did not come to stay. And we say, this too shall pass, right? It came to pass. Now then, it came to pass that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the sons of God saw the daughters of men. And now we're not going to get over here and talk about angelic beings or things of that nature. That doesn't fit in the text at all. Sons of God are righteous folks. You stop and think of how the Bible uses the expression sons of God in almost every other place. And it's righteous folks. And there's a couple of exceptions to that, but you've got to have a reason to make that kind of exception. And they took wives of the daughters of men, and evil results. That's what happens when godly people choose to be involved with ungodly people. Be not deceived. Evil communication, evil companions corrupt good morals. Don't be deceived about that. We are. You kids say, man, I hang around those guys, won't bother me at all. Well, you know, some of the problems you had is because you were hanging around those guys that weren't going to bother you at all. Don't be deceived about this. And that's why when you get to Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy tells the Jews, don't you marry these Gentiles. That's not prohibiting interracial marriage. The reason given in Deuteronomy chapter 7 is they'll lead you away from the Lord. And so when the sons of God marry the daughters of men, does evil come on this earth? Look in verse 5. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, grieved in his heart, and he said, I'll destroy man I've created from the face of the earth. Man, beasts, creeping things, birds, I'm sorry I made them. All of a sudden there's an introduction of the nature of God that's astounding. If all you know about the nature of God is what's revealed in these first 5 or 6 chapters of the book of Genesis. Now we understand this. Behold then the goodness and what? Severity of God. That's New Testament. We're not New Testament here. All of a sudden when David, a man after God's own heart, read, David only had access to 8 books of the Old Testament. I marvel that David was a man after God's own heart because he didn't have Psalms. All he had was historical books. All David had was historical books. That is remarkable in and of itself. Well, you'd think David at least have Psalms. No, he hadn't written them yet. Does that make sense? And so David's trying to figure out who God is and what God is like. And if you will limit yourself to where Noah was in relationship to this, it will absolutely blow your mind. Now you're about to see some other great things. Not going to be many chapters we'll read about a man who was the friend of God. Well, that's the flip side of it. But man had become evil. I think we ought to spend just a minute by talking about my spirit shall not always strive with man. The word always indicates what? What if you'd said my spirit never strives with man? Is that different from my spirit shall not always strive with man?
Strives for a time.
Yeah. When he says it will not always strive with man is an indication God's Spirit was striving with man right then. Wonder if Enoch ever tried to talk to people about living right. Wonder if Enoch ever talked to Methuselah about godliness and righteousness. Wonder if there was ever any. Wonder if Adam ever told his great grandchildren, guys, you need to live right. I've been in the presence of God. You need to live right. And then you've got Noah as a preacher of righteousness. Yes, June. That's right. Right. In fact, June's quoting from the book of Jude. Enoch is called, by the way, the seventh from Adam. That shows there are not any missing generations there. The New Testament says Enoch is the seventh, and Enoch prophesied. Wonder where he got his prophecy? Where does the ability to prophesy come from? The Spirit of God came on King Saul. What did King Saul do? He prophesied. Wait a minute. So we got Enoch, and he's a prophet. What's a prophet? He's somebody who speaks for God. What about Noah? How does Peter describe Noah? A preacher of righteousness. 2 Peter chapter 2 describes him as a preacher of righteousness. Is that 5-minute warning you just gave me?
6 minutes.
What?
6 minute warning.
Okay. I got to wind up in 1 minute. It's going to warm up real soon, and we'll see you next week. Well, next week we'll be in our gospel meeting. So, but we'll take up right here in 2 weeks.